Oki Naganago Mekoche Chistakomaki Dakots Nagotine Siku. My name's Michelle. I go by she and her pronouns. I'm trying to decolonize and use they and them. So I encourage people using they and them. I'm situated on Blackfoot territory. I want to acknowledge that this is the Kainai Bakani Siksika area, and then south of the colonial border are the Blackfeet Nation. Treaty 7 was signed in 1877, bringing the Blackfoot Confederacy as well as the Stoney Nakoda. And I acknowledge all, and the Dene from Sutina, and I acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit status and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. And as I said, I'm Michelle, and I'm going to start to try to do better at describing what you're seeing through the lens. I'm a white passing native with graying hair. I have dark glasses on and a white background because I haven't put up my pictures yet. And I have earbuds. Yeah, so that's a little bit about me. And what we like to do here is obviously talk about book clubs. And some of the other kind of concepts we have here is that we allow Indigenous people to speak first because it is an Indigenous book club. And we want to make sure that Indigenous get the floor first. So that's a little bit about me. We originally called this Chapters in Chat, and it just evolved into Indigenous Book Club more and more so, but it started in 2016, and we've been going strong, and I'm already starting on a 2025 list if anybody wants to read with me. So I'll just go by the participants list, and Rosemary, you're at the top, so maybe you'd like to speak next.
Hi, my name is Rosemary. I'm a white settler of European origin. I was born and raised in upstate New York on the stolen lands of the Onondaga Nation. And I've lived here in Mohkinstsis for over 45 years now. I'm a member of not only this book club, but Cat Settlers Book Club and the Reconciliation Action Group, as well as other community-based groups in the city. If I were to describe myself, I would say old woman with short white hair, lots of wrinkles, and glasses.
I love that. I was just saying, Rosemary, when you got here, that was something I seen in the video that I'm going to promote literally in this book club. And I was like, that seems so easy to do. We should do that. But Carol, you're up next if you'd like to introduce yourself.
My name is Carol, and I am a white-haired, white-skinned settler, and I was born in Whitehorse on the Chan Council and the Kwannon First Nation. And so I too am wrinkled, I'm blue-eyed, I'm from the Scottish colonizers and English. And if you look behind me, you'll see rows of Indigenous books, feminist books, and books on climate change and politics. So my pronouns are she and her, and it's a privilege to participate in this with you, Michelle.
Thanks, Carol. Go ahead, Kat.
Hello, I'm Kat. I use she, her, they, them pronouns. I am a white settler of British colonizer and German colonizer descendants who settled on Treaty 1 and Treaty 4 territory, and I was born on Treaty 1 territory. I am a middle-aged white woman, also wearing glasses, and I have long brown hair with lots of gray in it, and a white background. And so grateful to be here, as always.
Hi, I'm Jenny, and my pronouns are she, her. I'm a neuroqueer cis woman and white settler woman. I'm here in Mohkinstsis tonight, and you're seeing on your screen like a peach-colored white woman with a red-headed bob and a very busy living room background with a calendar and a blanket ladder and the window with plants. I'm very grateful to be here tonight. This is my first time at book club. And before living here in Treaty 7, I came from Treaty 4, where my ancestors have a long history of benefiting from colonization, particularly from land stolen from Anishinaabe, Nakota, Dakota, Lakota people, and Naheawa. It's also the home of the Métis Nation, and particularly the city where I'm from, Oksana-ka-Asistaki, has an important legacy in the book that we're discussing tonight. So I'm really excited to be here. That translates from Cree to be the place where the bones are piled, or pile of bones, and is what became Regina, the capital of the and home of the Northwest Mounted Police. So there's a deep legacy, and I understand the benefits that that's granted me, and I'm excited to talk about how that and hear how that impacts Indigenous and people of color. Thank you for having me.
Oh, grateful. Thank you for that. I can't wait for that.
Thanks, Michelle. Hi, everyone. I'm Wendy, and I use she and her pronouns. And I am a mid-40s white settler woman, with short brown hair, and I'm sitting in front of a mostly dark teal background, kind of wedged in the corner of my room between a wooden mirror and a windowsill. So not the most scenic of backgrounds, but really glad to be here today. I was born here on Treaty 7, where I am today as well, but grew up in Oklahoma, which is home to many nations, but the present day home to the Muskogee, Cherokee, and Osage nations, and also spent a lot of my childhood and early adulthood in Newfoundland, the traditional territories of the Micmac and the Beothuk. So really looking forward to another conversation with you all here tonight. Thanks.
Wow. Well, it's great having everybody adjust and do that description. Again, I can't take credit for it. I actually was going to play a little piece of one of the authors here. I don't think it's more than 10 minutes long, even though the entire thing is about an hour and 50. So it was done by the folks out east between the lines for the book launch. And like they have I wouldn't say all of the authors, I haven't got through them yet, but like a good chunk of them, right? And each one's kind of introducing themselves. So I'm just going to share screen. And hopefully this will all work. Now, I want to make sure that I share the sound too. Oh, there it is. Share sound. I have a new computer, so I always want to make sure that I get used to the new stuff. Okay, so now I got to move my little bar here without clicking something else. There we go. Okay, so I found this here, and I'm just going to let it play for itself. How do I make it play?
Thank you to all of you for being with us this evening. And Elle, you're going to take us to the first contributors.
We are going to be moving quite quickly this evening. We are trying to get you out on time. We know it's Good Friday, etc. tomorrow, if that's your thing. I should have said as well, I'm in Jabuktuk, Halifax, the unceded, unsurrendered territories of the Mi'kmaq people. And Desmond, you are in?
Treaty 13, territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, and most recently, treaty with the Huron, or the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Thank you, Elle.
And we don't just say that as something to mouth. We say that because understanding the land on which we are and the history of that land is a huge part of abolition. And to begin to frame that for us, we're really grateful to start off the evening with some representatives from Free Lands, Free Peoples. We have Abby Stadnick and Molly Swain joining us. Carrie is not joining us tonight, but is part of this chapter as well. And they're going to talk to you about chapter 9 in the book, which is called A Brief Introduction to Anti-Colonial Abolition. So welcome. And I know you have a presentation, so you can take it away. Go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elle and Desmond, for that introduction. Really excited and honored to be here, and I will just dive right in. So in our chapter, the members of Free Lands, Free Peoples provide a very brief introduction and an overview of anti-colonial abolition as we understand and practice it as Indigenous and non-Indigenous people living in the prairie region of so-called Canada. We ground our work always in conversation with the organizing and theorizing of the late Cree prisoner justice activist Corey Cardinal, as well as the justice traditions of the Nehiyaw and Métis peoples to whom the majority of our members belong. So anti-colonial abolition really asks us to grapple with the creation and expansion of prisons and policing as crucial colonial tactics to remove and contain Indigenous peoples, to open up our lands for resource extraction and settlement, and to maintain that access for the use and enjoyment of settlers. So Canada has really unilaterally subjected Indigenous peoples to its punitive and carceral injustice system. And the existence of police and prisons on Indigenous lands is a direct and deliberate violation of Indigenous sovereignty. At the same time, Indigenous peoples continue to uphold and practice our own traditional justice and legal regimes. So in the prairies and in many other territories, these regimes center accountability through relationality and collective modes of care and support. So recognizing the responsibility that we all have to uphold and maintain good relations with one another, other than human beings in the land, waters, and air. So an anti-colonial abolitionist lens also allows us to elucidate that Indigenous resistance, organizing, and treaty making are really key sites of contemporary assertions of Indigenous justice in the face of ongoing state violence. This chapter also turns its gaze to the colonial functions of policing itself as hostile occupying forces of the settler state, which are designed and deployed to suppress not only Indigenous political, legal, and social resistance to the ongoing ravages of colonialism, but also to undermine the survival of Indigenous peoples. The policing tactics used to assert and protect white interests range from active violence against Indigenous individuals and communities to upholding broader social conditions that threaten and devalue Indigenous lives and rights. From the creation of the explicitly anti-Indigenous Royal Canadian Mounted Police, which continue to be the biggest policing body in the country, to military invasion, daily violence and harassment, to the mobilization of settler lay people, just everyday settlers, to protect the white supremacist colonial status quo, an anti-colonial analysis of policing recognizes that police on Indigenous lands operate with a broad social mandate that legitimizes and even valorizes anti-Indigenous violence. And I'll pass it to Abby to chat a bit about the rest.
Thanks. And I just, of course, lost my notes. Okay, thanks. Hi, very happy and honored to be here. I'm Abby Stadnick. I'm a white settler, scholar, and organizer living in Misquachie, also known as Edmonton, Alberta. In our chapter, in addition to police, we also talk about prisons. And our chapter is important, I think, as are others in the book, for the way that it stresses that any anti-colonial abolitionist analysis of policing must also include an analysis of prisons and vice versa. These two systems work together as part of a carceral network that from its inception has been engineered to maintain and expand settler colonialism and support the ongoing genocide of Indigenous peoples. So in the section of the chapter on prisons, we begin with the work of Eric Young, who's a Soto man and a former prisoner, who makes clear the connection between the current prison system and another penal system, the Indian residential school system. As a residential school survivor, he says, I found living in prison to be the same as residential school. I was brought up in residential school, so jail was like a second home to me. This idea of prisons as the new residential schools was popularized in a 2016 Maclean's magazine article, but what is less well known is the long history of these two intertwined carceral institutions. One of the first residential schools in the United States, for example, was modeled on a prison where Plains Indigenous men were incarcerated as prisoners of war in the 19th century. So the rehabilitationist drive of today's prisons is rooted in the program of assimilation and the quote unquote civilizing mission of carceral institutions of the past. What this history and our analysis make clear is that prisons are an ongoing mechanism of settler colonial warfare against Indigenous peoples. We conclude the chapter by turning to examples of Indigenous resistance as Indigenous justice. The many movements of Indigenous peoples, including Idle No More and Land Back, for example, place relationality and mutual responsibility to be in good relations at their core, and in so doing enact Indigenous justice and abolitionist futures. To protect the land and communities, we argue that we must move against the state and toward the creation of interdependent, community-oriented, and self-determined justice systems of care and accountability. Thank you.
So that sets the tone. That sets the tone. And you know what? There's actually a second part coming up that I really enjoyed listening to as well. So again, I just promote the whole entire thing. But obviously want to encourage to hear what all of your thoughts were about this book. And I know for me, Indigenous people speak first. So I hate to say it, I did struggle with chapters that didn't really understand non-Indigenous and Indigenous settler colonial issues, treaty, et cetera, et cetera. So, but that said, like I took a lot of interest in like the sex work conversations because I know that Indigenous, well, women in general, and this is a long conversation about economic oppression against women, more so as Indigenous women. And, you know, so for me, outlawing sex work is, it, they might as well just say women starve to death, right? What I did love through this entire book was that bigger concept of community care. And so when I think about the Bear Clan, what they're doing, Walls Down Collective, those are the types of groups that we have here in the city that we can point to as folks trying to do that work. And I know Kat and I were trying to help supply some of those groups with harm reduction supplies. And you know, I still grab my Narcan and give it to organizations like that in order to distribute it to the unhoused population. So to me, I really enjoyed that. And obviously, everyone here who was a part of the Palestinian events, etc., you know, we are over surveilled when it comes to policing. And yet, when folks like me need a police officer, that's not true. That's not happening. So in my last podcast, I talked about policing in Calgary. I also talked about bylaw and the trans bylaw that we have and the problems with that as well. So I encourage you to listen to that. But I did pick this up from Walls Down Collective, and it's a poster with police crossed out, and it says, "Stop calling the police. We need to stop sacrificing marginalized groups in the name of safety. We need to expand our definition of keeping our streets safe to include safety for those who are already being systemically harmed." And it says altercation, drug poisoning, mental health crisis, people trying to survive. Call our crisis line before police. And at the Palestinian event, there was a police officer on top of the roof, and I turned to them and I showed them that picture, and he went out of his way to take a picture of me holding that sign. And yeah, I'm very, very happy to, frankly, because I had gotten a private message from another Indigenous woman who talked about their over 20-hour experience trying to have the police come to somebody who was like banging on their door, and the police wouldn't come because it was an Indigenous housing unit. So again, that concept of being over policed yet underserved, right? Like despite the MMIW report, despite the national inquiry, despite the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, this is still the reality in 2024 in Calgary for Indigenous people. So to me, this book really is helping me as somebody who tried to help the police, as someone who wanted to believe that we could make systemic changes. And, you know, obviously I lost a lot of that dream after running twice. And now with this, seeing the police distance themselves from so many Indigenous leaders and bringing in ones that have never read the national inquiry and such to legitimize what work they think they're doing. It's disappointing, to say the least. And that's where we're at. So to me, when I see the budget of what's going to the police when we need housing, and we need mental health resources, and we need culturally appropriate resources, and I'm not seeing money for that, the obvious thing to look at is the police, because they create more colonial trauma with colonial violence as well. So yeah, this book is coming at a perfect time for me, and I'll just kind of go through the same order of before. And Rosemary, if you would like to talk about the book from your point of view, and yeah, we'll go from there.
Michelle, I wasn't able to access the book through iBooks. So, but that video, I thought if I just listening to the first two speakers, I'd love to see the rest of the video.
Oh, it is a great video, Rosemary. Actually, I was just going to type it in here. Oh, and it didn't cross over.
You could email the link to me. That'd be great.
I will. Yeah, I will.
Thank you.
Because to me, it's I do find that listening to books is easier for me, as well as hearing videos and such while I'm doing dishes, etc. So yeah, 100%. And it's filled with the authors of these papers that were written, each chapter by each different author. So you're gonna love it, I'm certain. So
Thank you.
yeah, no, thank you, Rosemary, for that feedback. So I guess we'll go Carol.
Thanks, Michelle. I have to confess, I hadn't thought about this topic really thoroughly, and I was grateful to you for recommending this book because I read it. And the whole concept of a carceral continuum really stayed with me. It really struck me as something really super important. I have very mixed feelings about, I think you put it well, the concept of over-policed and underserved, because all you have to do is implement something and you'll find that out very quickly. But there was something that really stuck out for me because it kind of fits with the climate movement as well, is how, and it's on page 81, and it talks about the carceral continuum is maintained through the insidious implementation of laws that act to protect settler access to land and resources through the containment and punishment of Indigenous people. And then it goes on to talk about the Alberta government's Bill 1 and how punitive that is toward any kind of Indigenous opposition to blocking or trying to protest anything that interferes with big corporations or white settler aspirations. And if you look at the climate movement, you see that the people protesting are now punished, not the people punishing the protesters. So, I mean, like, it was a really good book for me to read because I know I now have to read a lot more. And it opened my eyes. I felt quite worried about sex workers. I know they have to do this because they're trying to survive. I still feel worried about them. I worry about their health and safety, and I feel like they're out there and they may have their own community, but I still worry about them. And I don't think they're looked after. I also don't believe that police should go to situations where there's drug overdoses. I don't, and I saw that in the book, and I don't think that that approach is the best approach necessarily, because I don't know what their training is on that. And it seems to be it's to try and find some kind of guilty person versus this is a situation that we need to help somebody, and what's the best thing we need to do at the moment. So it was a book that really stayed with me in a lot of ways. And I think there's a couple of, the first chapter was huge for me. And I think I must have been naive. I didn't understand the extent of conservatism in the police. I didn't, but I do now. So thanks, Michelle. I've rambled on here.
No, I think you did great. Thank you. And I'm grateful to hear that kind of feedback, though, that it really opened your eyes, because I'm not going to, like, I wasn't really open to the concept of complete abolishment until more recently in the say the last year, even though we read policing Indigenous people, or protests or vigils, everything. and experienced that 10 years ago with Colton Crowshoe's vigil here in my neighborhood, and having the police circling us and a helicopter above us, and they wouldn't open the bathroom for the family. Like we went, even that was one of those experiences. I couldn't believe that it was that eye-opening to me that the police would be that horrible to a grieving family. And especially after they had admitted they had done so many erroneous, egregious things to the family, of not acknowledging the missing poster, etc. During the exact same time, a young little boy and his two grandparents were missing. And that was front page for weeks and weeks. But they wouldn't talk about Colton in the same way, even though they all went missing around the same time. So, yeah, it's been really a journey for me to be like, you know, I know that the funding they get is unnecessary, because, for example, they just have police helicopters in the air on a regular and have to have specialized fuel just to have them up. And I'm not joking, they just circle over my house sometimes for hours. And
Exactly. I see them and I think, what are they doing?
yeah,
Just
Carol,
like maneuvers or what?
right? I don't know if you get a chance to listen to my podcast, but this next one, I really talked about the school resource officers, because what the CBE and the Calgary Catholic School Division and the Calgary Police want to do is expand it. So they want to have more cops in every school, despite having overwhelming feedback that we already find it wrong. So like that's what they're going to be pushing for in their next budgets. And we need to have an educated population that understands the gravity of why that's wrong. And kind of building on your point, though, about prisons and that. So Taylor McNally, part of our local Black Lives Matter group, has started having, with Stop the Stack YYC, these regular protests on both Friday and Sundays to acknowledge how wrong these prison systems really are. So I just find it like this book couldn't, it's just absolutely putting a spotlight on everything that's happening in the city right now. And I wish I was wrong. But anyway, I'll pass it over to Kat.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you for sharing all that about your experiences. As a privileged white person, I have had very few interactions with police, thankfully. But I think every person in this country should read this book, because as a society, I don't think we realize the power of that the police have, and how every population who is not middle-class white, quote unquote normal, is getting, as you said, over policed and underserved. The chapters that I really liked, well, I liked them all, and they sort of coalesced a lot of things I'd been thinking about from learning over the last few years, through book club and RAG and my own readings, and just paying attention to what's going on in the world. I never realized how social work is an extension of the police, and how social work is so used to monitor people and report on them and control their lives. So that was a bit of an eye-opener for me. And I really appreciated this selection. So thank you. And yeah, now I'm totally like, let's get rid of the cops. What do we need cops for? All the funding that goes to them should go into community services, should go into mutual aid, should go into supporting people where they're at, not, if we had, all that money could go to housing and education. And well, education is in another system that's a little messed up, but yeah, I'm babbling too, so I will stop.
I like your babbling. Jenny, would you like to unmute yourself?
I'm frightened that I'm going to do a lot of babbling as well. I love the topic of abolition. I have so much to say about this. The more and more that I learn, because I think we really all started to get a good dose of what a world without police would look like when George Floyd was murdered in 2020. I think that's, we started to see companies like Verso and Haymarket start offering free ebooks, many of which still are free. The ones actually listed on the back of our book. So I think that's when I really started to certainly learn about what a world without police looked like. But it did seem, as you mentioned, Kat, that a lot of the rhetoric directs people to social work and social services as the natural alternative to policing. And that, for me, I think the essays that discussed abolishing carceral social work and the one before it, the troubling police and social work collaborations, are a really important topic that we as settlers need to understand better. And that, I don't know if you've covered white benevolence in book club, but another excellent line of reading that white folks need to understand the role that we play. Moral superiority, helping, and goodness that just perpetuates the marginalization of communities of color, and including social workers of color. So a lot of just perpetuating white supremacy through social work, I think, is something that really isn't understood well enough by do-gooder white settlers. So that is an area that I would like to see more people understand, because I think that's how we need to encourage people to take the next natural step, which to me is the step towards re-indigenization. And that made me think about the importance of having people understand Sherry Pasternak's essay and work around Canada being a corporation, with the police on both a national and provincial and municipal level serving state and protecting state capital. So she discusses right at the end the importance of how, because the police were founded as an important part of the colonial project to protect the property rights as settlement occurred in the West, I don't think we can really conceive of a decolonized Canada without abolishing police. And I think there's lots of examples if we look to CIRG in BC and what happened in Fairy Creek, Wet'suwet'en. There are so many examples the essay discussed with the Manuels. So many examples of how police, Carol, like you mentioned, Bill 1 here in Alberta, just used as mercenaries to enforce the state. So for me, what I'd like to see more people understand is that we can't just directly replace police with social work, because all we're going to do is reinforce those stratified roles. And we need to step back then as white people from our helping roles, and then we can better understand how police play a role in just acting as mercenaries for corporate interests.
Well, thank you for that. I'm sorry. I was like in the middle of a thought and I'm like, I'm going to write it down and put it in there. And then you finished. And I'm like, oh man, that was too much of a gap. I should have hurried. I'm going to give this a quick pause for our friend and we'll go from there. All right. Who's next? Who's next on our list?
I think that might be me.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for this book. I pulled out a few things that resonated for me and helped me think about it. But I think what actually helped me be most ready for reading this book was reading the MMIWG report. And because I think this allowed me to think just more about what are the possibilities, what are the alternatives, what are the things that could be done. So the points I wanted to pull out first, and actually was really great to see that clip at the beginning, because that particular chapter 9, had notes all over that one, and wanted to start there because I really, we've talked before about how there are disproportionate levels of Indigenous people in prisons, incarcerated. But there's a part there on page 81 that talks about the timing of that rapid expansion of the incarceration, and that happened in the early 60s, but then they linked that timing to also when they had repealed the pass system, and the residential school system was also on the way out. So I just thought that was really interesting because, and other parts in the book also point this out, where it gets us really thinking about the realities of data, like the realities of what's happening, help us to have a more informed conversation rather than relying on stereotypes and narratives, and really what others have said about, we've grown up with awareness of this, it's hard to imagine anything else. And so just thinking about those realities were really important. And then earlier in that chapter, and this was another link to that MMIWG report for me, was talking about it. I'm just going to quote a little bit of it there, where it talked about Indigenous peoples have always practiced and continue to practice systems of justice that center accountability through care and relationality. And Michelle, you already highlighted that, like that really resonated. It allows me to think about a reality that doesn't look like now, that community care piece, but then talks about also Indigenous justice systems are complex and best understood within the specificities of the regions, cultures, and peoples to which these systems belong. So I think that's the other complexity of this, of imagining this, is that it requires nuance. It requires an understanding of cultural context, which is also not how our system currently has been devised. So I really thought that was important, and raises the importance of conversations like this one, or conversations we have with people in general, to understand each other more. Before we get to a new reality, we will have to understand our cultural context, which we don't, in day-to-day life, if we're not deliberate about it, doesn't tend to come up. So there were several other places where it talked a lot about that piece of let's see which chapter this was in. In chapter 7, they really highlighted how they, through the work they had done to build compassion for the incarcerated, or people who had been formerly incarcerated, and just really loved that part about building broader community empathy, so that people would understand the community and security that we're actually living with, and that we have all these, they talked about it as overlapping and mutually reinforcing structures. So I feel like that's what I think about when we're thinking about what happens with the police, where they've come from, what they do, and how they interconnect with these other systems. So took a lot from that chapter. Also really liked chapter 5, because it went at this from so many different angles. So in chapter 5, it talks about 4 different arguments for police abolition. And I really needed to read that because I felt like it could get at this from so many different perspectives, whether you're thinking about budgets, or the way that it's disproportionately grown over time. I needed some of those different arguments for me to start going further into, talking about this issue is not something that I think I have a lot of practice with. So it got me thinking about what are all kinds of different ways of looking at this, and the different levers of looking at it, and building an ability to have perspective with others. And then I think really that took me back to some quotes at the very beginning, and just that idea that systems of policing, I think this is page 27, not sure which chapter that was, but systems of policing have never been adequate in helping protect the lives of all people. So I think, again, that wraps me back to the need for looking at actual data, looking at actual numbers, and thinking about what those tell us, to help us disrupt narratives and stereotypes that we're used to, so that we can have a more informed conversation. I would say, like, I still do find this a hard topic to talk about and to think about. It is a really hard one to bring up, and I think on its face, it can feel very extreme to say. So appreciate the conversation, but really appreciated this book because it came at it from so many different angles. And what the part that resonated for me was imagining a future with more community care, like where communities are actually caring for one another, and what that would look like, because it does disrupt pretty much the baseline from which I'm used to living in the world. So just really needed those pieces to be able to even think about what that could be. Thanks, Michelle.
Oh, thank you. I invite everybody to unmute yourselves. I think about that bigger picture of building on everything Wendy said, like for us to really talk about what does an alternative look like? What does that different future look like? And I want to, again, respect and understand we're on Blackfoot territory and they have the Brave Dog Society. And wouldn't it be great if we could get the Blackfoot to reimagine what the Brave Dog Society could look like as part of, with equality, one, and us living under Blackfoot rules in general. And that's how I picture another alternative, because unfortunately, settlers have shown they will not work with us. So we have to go back to our laws and our traditions, and then have non-Indigenous adapt. So like the concept of when in Rome, you do what the Romans do, right? It's the same concept that, we're in Blackfoot territory. So at Little Satu Dene here has to adapt and take on Blackfoot protocols, etc. And I do that when I'm in Blackfoot circles to know I have to follow their protocols, even if I, would do it differently where I come from. So, and I see that, that conflict sometimes with Cree and the Blackfoot here, the Métis and the Blackfoot, like I see that regularly. And then it is fun though when Treaty 7 fights within themselves, like and when I say fun, I mean or say fight, I mean poke fun. So for example, the way you have rivalry between a school and a school, or a hockey team and a hockey team, like that type of rivalry. And so I do enjoy that. So what would that look like if we took, our 9 laws of Dene, that the Tsuut'ina obviously follow too, and then you look at the Stoney and incorporate what their idea of justice would be, and maybe we do just apply it to the boundary where the mountains are, and that's Stoney territory, and that's where their laws apply, and such. And so, but that bigger picture of Blackfoot and Dene as well, working together with Brave Dog societies, and then could we incorporate that at all with colonial policing? At this point, I'd say no. And actually that exact page that you were talking about, page, I want to say it's 27, 28. Systemic racism cannot be uprooted by police reform. I had hope, but I'm not there anymore. I know it can't. I know it cannot, because I see the hate in the police. And you can't culturally teach and undo all of that hate. They see themselves as the authority, and we're all like literal maggots, and anyone who's not in a uniform is a maggot to them. And it's been very hard to not see that. And really hard to be like, well, you can't, you know, that we're talking about a group of people that are disproportionately wife beaters. You know, how do you teach them to not hit your wife when that's literally your job 24/7 when you have your uniform on, right? So, yeah, I just don't know if I can do that. And I have kind of researched more, because back to what Wendy was saying, where you can't really picture a life without this. But the truth is, even in Europe, like the cops did not have guns, and then cops did not have batons and such, and they didn't have the um, violent authority that they do here. Now, of course, the king's troops sure did, and utilized that regularly and did that. But you know what I'm saying, where that there is a better way of policing ourselves without having to pay. And then I made this point in my podcast. When I was growing up in Sylvan Lake, there was only 2,000 people. That was the population, and there was a police building and like 3 cruisers, and one of the cruisers was forced to go, like they had a massive jurisdiction, like into the Rocky Mountains. They'd have to go out to Rocky Mountain House, trunk road driving, like huge area that they had to take care of with only a few police. And we never had policing in the schools ever. That was never something that was ever an idea. And here it is so normalized. It is just a part of the school education system. So we do have to recognize that, like, it has been a steady creeping in of police in our world in every facet of it. So what we can do is start reimagining a world without all of that, because like the other part is that, like, that bottleneck between Alberta justice and the policing, where it's like Alberta justice isn't even, the court systems, they don't have enough, judges and court staff, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't want to see money going into that, because as I've learned through this Awaton process, you can't just go around suing people. It's a $200,000 endeavor, because you have to spend $100,000 on your lawyer, and in case you lose, $100,000 on their lawyer. And I don't know who thinks this is a justice system, but to me, that is not a justice system, right? So we really have to kind of look at this world and go, what are we doing wrong? And at what point in time do we say, okay, this is wrong, this is wrong? I remember Jean Chrétien having the, courage to say, okay, we're done with this whole division that did this torturing of these kids. I remember that. So, like, what will it take for us to go, okay, we're done with all of this? Like, what will it take? Because clearly we are not, doing well with the current status quo, and no impetus, no movement from any of the elected officials, whether provincially or federally, and frankly, municipally, to do better on any of this. And I mean, we legitimately elected Courtney Walcott, who was a part of the Defund movement in 2020. He's elected. And now the conversation is more money, more budget for cops in schools. How did we get here? How did it in 4 years it go so like the pendulum swung so far the other way? So I kind of want to ask you, and Wendy, you touched on this, that bigger picture of how do we even like engage with a society so committed to not changing the status quo, and giving more and more funding to the military industrial complex of policing. So I thought maybe I'd just start with Rosemary, Carol, Kat, Jenny, go from there.
I've just been listening and thinking, it's so tied up with capitalism, right? And property, that we need to go even deeper. I think like the whole issue around the policing is a symptom of a deeper problem that no one wants to look at. I mean, just as people assume that, oh, we've always had police, this is the way it has to be, everyone thinks capitalism is the only kind of, economy, right, that exists and that functions.
and that the kind of capitalism we have here in North America is the only kind. You know, so there's the issue of there are different forms of capitalism, but also there could be very different forms of organizing one's economy that isn't based in private property. And it would provide more room and space, right, for the community caring and relationships and all the rest. So, so then I keep thinking, so perhaps, you know, within Indigenous nations where there is some sovereignty, they could reestablish, but then what's the interaction between, right, the sovereign nation and the rest of society? And yeah, and how does it expand elsewhere? I don't know, that's just what was running through my head.
Yeah, just building on that though, because you are a part of that group of I can't remember what their name is now, but ending poverty, people committed to ending poverty. And like, are these conversations about police happening in those circles? And is there a way that we can get folks to see how that's part of the, you know, issue? But your points about, you know, seeing different types of economies, I think is as relevant in this conversation about seeing other forms of community care and justice, because ultimately what you're talking about is community care, just not monetized. Right on. Thanks, Rosemary, for all of your thoughts. I appreciate it. Carol, would you like to jump in on this?
Well, it's a good question, Michelle, and I don't think it's easy to answer it, but I can only say this. As you spoke, this was what tossed through my mind. I used to think that big transformations in the world had to come from someplace else. They had to come from the government or certain levels of government. It just had to come from someplace big with bigger power than me. And I don't think that way anymore. I think this book club is a book club where transformational thinking begins. And then we take it forward. So this kind of conversation is occurring in the gender equity group that I belong to. In fact, I talked about this book to them on Sunday, yesterday. And so this is where the transformation starts. And it's an uphill battle. It worries me because as we move to more autocratic governments, conservative and autocratic governments, that the tendency will be toward more policing of the state. And that is a big concern because it's an erosion of rights. But back to what you said, I think it begins here. I think this is the transformational kind of thing that occurs. And certainly I feel transformed from this. So my job is to talk about it. And I tell you, I do, and I meet with resistance. And when I do, not just about this book, but all the books we speak of, I say to myself, if I feel this ticked off, what does an Indigenous person feel? What do they feel? And sometimes everything in me wants to rise up and screech, but I don't, because to do that will defeat the purpose of the conversation I want to have. But it's chipping away. It's chipping away at it. And I want it to go a lot faster, but it's going to take time. And it's as Wendy said, we can't visualize something different, but a caring community can occur. I had that happen here. We had a big incident on our street. We had a lot of problems, and the police, just wasn't working. There was no effective resolution. So I got the community together. And out of 18 people on the street invited, 15 showed up. That was pretty powerful information to take to the landlord. It can happen. But the trick, Michelle, is to maintain that community caring. How do you maintain that momentum? And that's where I'm not sure. I guess the fight never stops.
Yeah, and it's always learning and evolving. Like, so for example, you know, taking it further to the disability lens and, following on TikTok or Twitter, a lot of the folks who are talking about Palestine and everything, and they're like, you can't have liberation when you're not talking about the disabled people. And when you put disabled in front of Black, when you put it in front of Indigenous, when you put it in front of Palestinian woman, whatever, like, are we meeting that as well? So when you talk about community care, and I think of some of the relationships that come and go in my life, and some of the reasons why, but that bigger picture that, we also can't expect us all to be perfect. A concept that I've heard years ago, I'm sure you all have, is that we can't have a revolution without dancing. And I used to think that was stupid. I'm like, we got bigger things to fry, but now I'm starting to understand that bigger concept of community care and taking care of each other. And that's actually what that is more referencing to, is that bigger picture of like, how do we maintain this? I don't know. How does the Walls collective, what's Walls Down collective, continue this? Bear Clan, I've watched some of the inner workings of these organizations fall, and been a part of organizations that just don't have the ability to continue, right? And so every time I think of like this book club, this is the one thing I know I can maintain, and the other ones just hope that there will be enough folks willing to do the work and willing to help and willing to, it's so, I wish everyone understood, like, if you have 10 pounds to move, but you move 5 and I move 5, it's no big deal. But if it's always the same person moving that same 10 pounds, it's really hard. So, and I think like Rosemary's been doing this for decades here in the city of Calgary. And a lot of folks are always doing that work. I feel like I was kind of forced to start doing it. It wasn't really a choice. I don't like that term activist, but when you face systemic racism and discrimination at the hospital, and that just led me on this path of, what the hell? And here we are, and trying to communicate, okay, well, what is fundamentally wrong? Why was I being policed in the hospital? Why are nurses policing? Why are doctors policing? Why are social workers policing? So I don't even need a person with a uniform on. There's many folks with credentials that will really hurt us. And I think too, because like, kind of to Carol had mentioned, she used to think that, and I identified with this, that only government could make big changes, and they can make big changes. But one of the biggest holdups that I see in all of these recommendations of all these books that I talk about are literally law societies, not making those systemic changes. And you see the school boards not making systemic changes, and you see all the police not making systemic changes. So like, I wish everybody's seen it as it's all of us. You have to do it at every single level, whether it's a community association, a sports club, work, wherever it is. But I just don't think people see that personal buy-in when it comes to these things, which of course makes these conversations very, very difficult to have with people who, have never had police interaction, who have never written their, different order of government, anything like that, right? Like, trying to engage with a common person is so difficult, and especially if they're in a whole world of whatever it is they're into. So I don't know. I guess I kind of really rambled. You guys talk about, oh, I don't want to ramble. I totally rambled. I think Jenny's up. Or Kat's up. Okay, go ahead, Kat.
I was just gonna say, I don't know either. I know everything just seems so insurmountable. So what I've learned is to, start small, work one person to, like you said, community associations, your school, your work, work on issues there, and try and maintain hope, and try and follow self-care too, because I always say too, I'm in it for the long haul. So I've got to learn to pace myself and not feel guilty about not doing enough, and just try and be consistent and yeah, work on relationship building too. I feel like I don't know enough Blackfoot people. So I would like to learn more and know more and learn more about and actually put into practice Blackfoot ways of knowing and of justice. So I don't know.
It's a lot. I know. I always think of that expression, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Yeah. And a quote I also heard was, I can't remember where exactly, but governments don't create change, they react to change.
Mm,
So when we force them to change, they will change.
love that. Thank you, Kat. I think Jenny, you're up next. Although, I don't know, I do want invite you all to unmute and throw in your thoughts as we go for sure.
I mostly echo what everyone else has already said. Both Kat and Carol touched on the importance of just having conversations with people. And I've done years and years and years and years of beat people over the head with my righteous opinion activism. And I agree with Carol that that isn't always well received. And I am trying in the last year or two to soften that approach and approach topics with more self-control and self-regulation. And I think that's one of the ways, touching again on Kat's point about self-care, and Michelle, you talking about the importance of care work. Disability justice was a great example of the importance of celebrating our capacity, but recognizing it, that the way that we persevere and continue to resist is by continuing to exist. And that's, I think, a lesson as settlers that we should humbly accept from Indigenous and marginalized people. There's a Audre Lorde quote on my wall that really keeps me going that says, caring for myself isn't an act of self-indulgence, it's an act of self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare, because without the ability to show up, we're not going to be able to do any work. So that kind of keeps me going. The concept of filling my cup first and being self-regulated, because when talking about how are we going to move people, Wendy, you talked about budgets, and that is often a topic that comes up when we're talking about police. But what I found a few years ago, and especially if you attend those police commission meetings every month, if you have the self-determination to torture yourself through that, it's completely irrational. There is no rational thinking when people are conceptualizing protection, and the irrationality is evident in the countless dollars that we continue to throw at them so that they can fly that helicopter around and terrorize us, right? And let's not think for a second that that's not part of in continuing that culture of intimidation that reinforces that carceral presence in our lives, right? So I think we have to keep that in mind, that we are emotional creatures. So when we're having conversation settler to settler, we need to do the work, in my opinion, of finding out what is your conceptualization of police, and what do you think they're protecting you from? Because we all have an idea. We've all formed a well-established worldview that police play into. We conceptualize justice and punishment and retribution and reconciliation in different ways. And a lot of times we are strongly moved by our fears. So the most productive conversations I've had around abolition with people is finding out, what is it you fear? What role do you think police are playing? What does your community look like? When was the last time you needed to call police? And then that kind of opens the door for people to share their understanding of how that works. And that's a great opportunity to educate. Okay, well, did you know that that experience is not shared? Like, we're white people and that might be our experience, but here's some different lenses. So I think, to me, torturously, because I like to have a big impactful approach, but I think, unfortunately, these are one-on-one conversations where we have to start changing hearts and minds by finding out what people are afraid of, and then helping them to appreciate that police are not the solution to that.
Those are great points. Fabulous, fabulous. Thank you, Jenny. Just going to.
And they talk about how to present yourself, like how to speak to the media, how to you can actually pay for courses through them, but there's stuff there, informed opinions, how to speak to the media, how to express your opinion, how to sandwich information. You say this, then you say this, and then you say this. You always put a statistic in there because people like numbers. So it's all of this kind of stuff that you can put together to make it work. But I love this discussion tonight. I love how this book is animated, everybody. I love animated in a way of like critical thinking and determination and synthesis of thought. I love this.
Good, good. No, I think it's a hard conversation to have, actually. I really do believe that. I read Desmond Cole, and I've read a lot of Black authors talk about it, but it's just to try to get folks to really understand the gravity of it. And even our own people, I find, sometimes are the worst for advocating, oh, we need social workers, we need this. And it's like, we need to start saying Indigenous social workers that are already, have Indigenous understanding, not just colonial understanding, because that is a problem in our system, as well as policing, right? Like we don't want to replicate settler policing. We want to change that, right? So yeah, we want more funding, but what does that look like that's different? So anyway. Yeah, so Wendy, did you want to chime in at all with everything that we've been kind of saying here?
Sure. I'm not quite sure where I'll go because I've been resonating with a lot of the things said. And Jenny, you really hit on a lot of the things that I was thinking about too. I mean, I think that issue of fear is huge. Like, I think we're making lots of decisions out of fear, but I guess also our conversation tonight made me think about what were the turning points in my own mind to be just more open to what things could look like, and broadening how to talk to anybody about the things that I'm thinking. We talked lots today about our current system and how it feels, and Rosemary, you made some good points about, it's hard to envision something that isn't a capitalist system when you're living in that world. And I think a lot of where the book started is things that happened during the pandemic. It talked about George Floyd, talked about a lot of those pieces, but certainly I think I wanted to make a comment that starts there, because I think that's where realities kind of came crashing at me, because I was in a place where I wasn't having a lot of luxurious time at home. Like, I was working probably more than ever before. Just different people experience the pandemic differently, and I think I experienced burnout during the pandemic in ways that I had never before experienced, and really got to that place of like, this is not sustainable. So I do think part of what helps people to think about this is getting to a point where you're kind of pausing and regrouping in your own mind about like, what am I accepting as just normal daily practice, and is that okay? And I think, you know, we've already mentioned the idea of self-care, self-compassion, but I think I had to have a lot of self-compassion to be able to even explore these ideas. So I do think that those pieces were also happening around that time for me, was looking into more of those pieces. But I do think coming through it and talking with more people, then I also got a lot more gratitude for what I do have. So I do think I have like enormous privilege to be able to even have the time to think about these things, to even have the time to think about how I'll do daily things differently. So I think I'm not quite sure what to do with that thought, but wanted to share it here as one of the complexities of what we're talking about. And then love what we've been saying about just how to have conversations in a way where we listen more than talk. So I wanted to share a couple things. I think about that a lot. Think about how to ask curious questions, but also how to get better at perspective taking. Like, so how can I have a conversation with someone who really I totally disagree with, but like I really do want us to get closer to something in common. A couple of examples, you know, it made me think of I bet Carol, you probably are aware of her work, Catherine Hayhoe's work on climate change. And just she also talks about this idea of like find something in common and then start there as your conversation, as something that other people who might see it totally differently would resonate with. And the other thing that I'm really enjoying right now, I listen to lots and lots of podcasts. So another podcast that I really love is Hidden Brain by NPR. And they're doing some, did you hear that one too? And they just recently, this last week or so, they're doing ones, it's in a US context, but they did one on what we have in common, win hearts then minds. So it's really thinking about all the things we were just talking about this evening, kind of from a different angle, but that whole idea that one of the things I took away from that is that we actually have more in common than we have different, but we don't really have enough awareness of each other to know that. And then we're operating from fear. We're operating from what our normal practices are. So those are some of the things I'm thinking about. And I do feel like talking about it this way makes it feel more possible to wake up every day and make better choices. Because I think if it's overwhelming, like people just are like, whatever, I can't solve that problem. I guess I'll just accept it how it is. And I think when you go through burnout, when you go through intensity of like, I actually can't just accept how it is anymore, that's when you're, certainly for me, that was when I was most open to thinking about what could things otherwise look like. And then it on bottom line just takes actually caring about people. Like I think it was really impressive for me how it improved relationships in my own life. Because then I just wasn't as upset with them. I was more willing to hear to hear what they were going through. So that is a lot of it sounds very small, but I think is actually at the heart of a lot of what we talked about tonight. And I just love this conversation today. It really got me thinking in a lot of big, broad, caring ways. And that is what I definitely want us to spread.
Boy, am I ever happy to hear everybody feel so empowered after today, because like this book, I needed to figure out how to talk about this better. I thought in 2020, you know, we had so many great resources to kind of pull from and talk about it from stats, but even prior to 2020, like it was just common sense in so many ways that if you looked at the numbers, you know, it's cheaper to invest in housing than it is to not. And I just thought everybody knew those things, but now to see that bigger picture where it's like, you know, somehow we've allowed the police to just take so much of this budget and chip away from all of those other services that we need. And hopefully now we all feel better about how to engage with that. And then some strategies, man, some great conversations that came out of here from here. For folks who are listening on my podcast, if you look in the description, what I'm going to do is copy and paste a few different links that we have here in our chat. You know, one, I recommend you come to the book club, but two, and then you can get these right away. But lots on, you know, movement by Kelly Hayes, who is at truthout.org, author Kelly Hayes. We'll put that up there. We're also we're given some good links on Jane McLevely. And speaking engagement, it sounds like a Stephen Garvey or something, but only for union-based thinking and broader and people feeling very empowered with how to talk to other people about like really hard topics like this one. So I'm going to be looking into that some more. Encourage our folks who are listening to do that. And then our next book I'm really excited about, and it's about Canada and Palestine. And I think that's a really relevant conversation. That's been a very hard conversation that I've seen. I just want to say to folks, I've put it out on social media before. Kat's showing the book right now. But Canada as a settler colony on the question of Palestine is our next book. And I just wanted to say that I did put it on social media, I would say probably in October, that if you are looking for mental health resources on the topic of Palestine, I have a PDF that I can send you, but it is more geared towards Muslims. So I did forward it to the Muslim community that I know locally, but I know I haven't said it on the podcast in a long time. So anyone who's interested in that, please let me know. I think it's really important that we're seeing genocide in real time on our phones, and that seems to be for some reason so far removed from our governments and from our media. So it feels very lonely. Earlier today at 5 there was a rally to discuss Rafah and the intense bombing that's happening at the time of this recording. It's the day after Super Bowl. And on Twitter, we had a hashtag about Super Bowl genocide, because as people were watching the Super Bowl, Israel was doing an incredible amount of bombing in Rafah, the one place they said was a safe place for millions of people to go to. And now, as of today, I have seen images of a young girl and some things that I will never unsee. And this is just on my phone. I can't understand how our politicians and everyone else in the world is so disassociated from this. So yeah, that's our book. Thanks folks for making the time for coming. I so appreciate all of you. I really also enjoyed this conversation and hearing different perspectives of how people felt about this. So I'm really looking forward to our next book club as well. And just know that we're in solidarity, and most of you I get to see on a quite a regular basis. So I am very happy about that. And anyone out there listening, you are more than welcome to join us anytime. Thanks folks for listening.